Jeff Hampton with the Hampton Law Firm. Welcome to our YouTube channel. Today I want to talk to you about DWI blood draws. Is it legal for a police officer to forcibly take your blood if you're under investigation for a DWI? So we're going to talk about the law as it relates to that in Texas today. And then if you wait around to the end of this video, I'm also going to give you a free ebook, The Ultimate Guide to DWI Defense in Texas. Okay, let's break down the scenario of a DWI blood draw, okay? Maybe you're hypothetically pulled over, the police start doing they bring you out, they have you start trying to do field sobriety tests, and at some point during the investigation, they're going to ask you for a blood draw. Now, I want to first break this down into two parts. Number one, if you consent to a blood draw, what happens? Well, under the law, there's an old saying that consent cures all. So if a police officer, even if he didn't have probable cause to ask you for a blood draw, if he asks you to give one and he says, hey, are you willing to give me a sample of your blood? And you say yes, then in that situation, there's nothing we can do to change that unless the collection of the blood was done improperly. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. Okay, so number one, consent kind of cures any of the defects that the police may have been working up underneath at the time, all right? Now, the next question, though, is let's say that you're not going to give them a blood sample and you refuse, okay? So under that situation, what happens, the prosecutor will have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that your blood sample was taken at the request or order of a peace officer. They're going to have to also show that it was taken, number two, by a qualified technician. So not just anybody could take your blood. It needs to be someone who is qualified, and the law defines that as a qualified technician. That could have been a physician, a chemist. It could have been a registered nurse, a licensed vocational nurse. And then here's the third one that we've caught some on is it must be in a sanitary place, okay? It's very important that these specific requirements under the law are met, because if they're not met, then the actual blood draw, even under a warrant, can be thrown out and not used against you, okay? So here's the question. People say, well, what if I was subject to a mandatory blood draw, and how do I know if it was done properly or not? Well, the first thing is, many of you are aware of this, is you find somebody every holiday weekend, what is it? They basically tell you that no refusal weekend, right? Texas has these running all the time. No refusal weekends. And kind of no refusal weekends has turned into no refusal all the time, right? So the way that it works now in Texas is if you refuse to give them a blood draw, they are going to go get a warrant, attempt to get a warrant, a search warrant to have your blood drawn. So let's talk about for a few minutes about what needs to be done in order for that warrant to be legal. With any warrant, there must be what's called an affidavit. There must be a search warrant affidavit. And within that search warrant affidavit, there must be enough evidence to establish probable cause to determine that a blood draw should have even taken place. And so it must be, number one, signed by a magistrate. Believe it or not, we've actually had incidents where we've seen a warrant be sent over and the magistrate never signed it before they took the blood. Well, that's a concern, okay? Number two, the affidavit accompanying the warrant must sufficiently establish probable cause that you committed the crime of DWI, and the specific evidence sought to be seized would constitute evidence necessary for that DWI. So my point is, sometimes officers are sloppy on their search warrant affidavits. They may put virtually little or no evidence within that actual affidavit portion. And if that is not adequately covered and they don't do a good job of explaining the evidence, it can't just be conclusory. It needs to specifically explain what they're relying upon for the affidavit, for the search warrant. If that's the case, then that may not be sufficient to hold up in court, and your blood draw may be thrown out, okay? Now, what if the blood draw is allowed, okay? Well, I just want to tell you this. Understand this. A DWI blood draw does not necessarily prove you were intoxicated at the time of driving. And what I mean by that is the average time to get a blood draw through a search warrant can be anywhere between 2 to 3 up to 5 hours. I've seen it take 5 or more hours before an actual blood draw is taken from the time you were operating the vehicle. Well, I tell you that to say this. A blood draw taken many hours after the time you were driving only shows what your blood alcohol level was at the time you gave the test, not necessarily at the time you were driving. So the state of Texas is going to have to try to go back in time. It's a concept called extrapolation. They're going to try to go back in time to see if they can prove what your blood alcohol level was. But they're going to need to know certain information. They're going to want to know what your last drink was, when your last drink was, how many drinks you had, what you had to eat. They're going to want to know your weight, your height. That's type of information, basic information that they're going to gather from you if you talk to them. If you follow me on this, if you speak to them and you answer their questions, they're asking you those questions because they want to go back in time and see if they can have a toxicologist say, I believe he was intoxicated 4 hours earlier, okay? So what I mean by that is this: just because you have a blood alcohol level that looks like it's over the legal limit 4 hours after you were driving, it does not at all mean the state of Texas can prove that you were actually intoxicated at the time you were operating that motor vehicle. All right. So these are just a few things to be aware of. And maybe you're facing a DWI. Maybe you've recently had to go through the process of having a blood draw done. If you have questions, we'd be happy to answer them for you. Don't hesitate to contact the Hampton Law Firm at 817-877-5200. And thanks again for joining us. I promised you if you waited around to the end of this video, I would give you a free ebook, The Ultimate Guide to DWI Defense in Texas. Click the link right below. I'll be happy to send it over to you. And I look forward to seeing you on our next video.